Our forests are in trouble. There's probably the trees that are here are the last ones. If they fall, nothing's going to take their place. And it's because of deer. Deer are overpopulated here. They're very used to people. They're habituated to people. And therefore they're not moving around as much. And they're eating everything. They're eating most of the understory of our forest. We really don't have much understory left. They're eating most of the wildflowers. They're eating all of the young trees, the seedlings of trees. So we don't have too many trees that are younger than 15 years old. There's much less understory. Without invasive species, there's hardly anything growing in the understory of the forest. So we're losing not only the wildflowers, but we're losing, understory bushes, anything that covers the ground for ground animals. But probably the worst thing about it is the lack of regeneration of the forest. So the deer eating all of the young trees, they're killing the younger trees, killing the seedlings. There's just no trees to replace the mature trees that we have now. So each tree that falls over, that's the last one. There's nothing to replace it. So in effect, our forests are really dying. They're going to, in 50 to 100 years, who knows what it's going to look like. It could be faster than that, depending on, if deer keep increasing in numbers. If nothing else happens, whether human-induced or nature, then the deer are going to create fields out of our forest. The deer themselves will be harmed. They'll start starving. They're going to lose food. They're losing food now. We compare our forest with other forests where deer have been an issue. There's experiments that have shown that deer are the problem because they put up deer fences that keep deer out of certain areas. And when you do that, the forest regrows. Plants grow up, wildflowers, bushes, and then finally the trees all replace themselves. They create layers in the forest. And so you'll have these very dramatic experiments where you look on one side of the fence and it's like a jungle. And on the other side of the fence where the deer are present, you can see straight through the woods and there's hardly anything growing there. It looks like a heavily, heavily managed forest, even though nobody's managing it. There's also experiments that showed that fenced deer in and had different densities of population within the fences. And that showed that, if you have more than, 15 or 20 deer per square mile, then you're going to lose your forest. The forest starts thinning out and you start losing pretty much everything in the forest. Here, it's even more extreme. When we bring experts over, they look at it and they're seeing that the deer are eating things that they normally wouldn't even eat. Usually a good sign that deer are overbrowsing a forest is certain plants will take over because the deer don't like them. The deer will eat everything else. And here the deer are eating the stuff they normally don't like hay, stunted ferns. That's one thing that they're starting to chomp on. And normally they just don't like them. Another big indicator of deer overbrowsing is the browse line. If you look through the woods, you'll see a line where foliage is pretty much gone from about our head height down to the ground. And that's just from deer, and it's at the height of deer. They're just walking, they reach up, they eat a little bit. Here, because they're so habituated to people and there's no predators, they can just sit there and eat and eat and eat until they kill whatever they're eating. If they're eating a young tree, they pull it out of the ground, or they just eat all the leaves off it until it dies. There's three main issues to be concerned that a lot of places that are going through this try to inform people. And those three issues are, of course, car accidents. Anywhere you have many deer, you get more car accidents from the deer. But we do have a lot of deer vehicle collisions. And that's usually one of the main concerns. Lyme disease is definitely another concern. And here, those professors and scientists who have been here for decades, they've never seen the black-legged tick, or what's called the deer tick, here until about 5 years ago. And now, even I've been here 15 years and never had a tick until last year. And that tick was what they call a deer tick. So Lyme disease is definitely a concern. I mean, there's all sorts of different research on Lyme disease showing sometimes the deer seem to be the problem, sometimes they don't. But it is pretty clear that, wherever you get deer, they spread at least the tick, and the tick spread the Lyme disease. I mean, the greatest concern, even beyond that, is the forest itself, because if we lose our forest, we're losing, climate regulation, we're losing all that oxygen from the trees. You're basically losing your ecosystem. And healthy ecosystems are what help people live on this earth. So we can't just survive off of concrete and asphalt. We need to be able to have natural areas which provide, nutrient cycles, energy cycle. Even some places, places that depend on wood have to go through a lot of effort to try to protect their new trees from deer. If things keep on going the way they are, then if a certain amount of decades, if we have nothing but field left over, it's going to be a lot different for people's experience out here. We use this place a lot for education, for research, and we have a great variety of habitat out there right now, so far. And once the forests leave, what are we going to have? We're going to have fields, maybe we might have some kind of undergrowth with mostly invasive species. It'll be a lot harder to walk through it, because it'll be tangled with, messes of multiflora rose or honeysuckle or, other bushes that we normally wouldn't want here because they push out all the native species. And deer actually facilitate that by eating native species and allowing the non-native species to flourish even more. I mean, after researching all the different solutions, the only one really is to reduce the deer population. And there's several ways to do that, but the most effective way is culling. Culling, basically killing many animals. That's what culling is. And culling deer, we would have to cull about 90% of the population, unfortunately, to bring it back down. We have 236 deer that use our property. About half of those live right on the property. Half of those come in and out of the property. So that's, 150 to 200 per square mile. It's crazy. And in order to recover a forest, you need it back down to 8 to 10 per square mile, which is a drastic reduction. And hunting won't do it. Hunting it would be too slow. There's a lot of different issues with hunting as well. On a campus full of students, a culling would have been done in 2 weeks. When students weren't here, it was the safest way to do it. With hunting, we'd have to open up the hunting season or try to figure out permission to hunt only when students were here. And there's not many legal places to hunt on our property either. So, you'd have to put like 30 hunters on one spot. It just wouldn't work. They'd all have to kill 2 or 3 deer at that spot. With the culling, pretty much if you do it, you have to give the meat away. You can't sell the meat, which is fine. The best way to deal with all those dead deer is to feed other people with them. So all of the meat would be given to charity, local charities, whichever ones would agree to take it and process it. So all the deer are taken to basically a processor, and then they distribute the meat to charities, local pantries, food shelters, whoever would want it. It actually would be a very sustainable source of meat. And the culling, it wouldn't be a one-time thing. We'd have to do it at least every 3 years or so at first, and then hopefully, gradually, we won't have to do it so many times. You need to maintain a lower deer population, a population that's balanced with the environment in order to recover the forest. We would think that the deer would starve to death, and in fact, we've had several deer starve to death 2 winters ago. But the deer supplement their diet by going out into the neighborhoods, going onto campus. They seem to be either eating grass or something in the grass, because they kind of graze like cows now instead of browsing. The deer will browse on all of the plantings on campus, people's gardens, people's plantings on their lawns. So the deer are supplementing their food. Even though there's hardly any food left in the forest, they're going out and they're still able to get more food outside of the forest. So our forests are, they're a snack time for whatever they can find. That's where they sleep, that's where they shelter during the day. But then they go out onto campus or other neighborhoods and they find other food. This year, we actually didn't have any die off. Even though we had a harsh winter, it was freezing cold. We had 1.5 to 2 feet of snow throughout the forest, and yet the deer were fine because most of our deer went into CIW woods where they could find a lot of acorns. And so we had a massed year of acorns, and that meant, a huge crop of acorns for the winter. And the deer were able to survive off of that through the whole winter. As harsh as our winter was, we didn't even have any die off. We had one deer that fell through the ice and drowned, and probably two that I know of that were hit by cars. There were probably more than that. I don't always see the deer that are hit by cars. And so, yeah, they just don't die off because even though there's no food in the woods, they can find it elsewhere. And whatever grows in the woods, they eat it as soon as it grows. So, yeah, if we were able to reduce the deer population here, that would help neighborhoods, that would help other people as well. There are studies that show when you reduce the deer population, you reduce the number of car accidents if that's your goal. Our goal here is the forest, of course. We really care about a healthy ecosystem. We really want our forest to regenerate, and not only for education and research, but because it benefits pretty much everyone. It benefits humanity to have healthy ecosystems. One thing you hear about ticks is that you should stay away from high grass. I don't even tell people that anymore. Pretty much you can get ticks out in the lawn now. If you lay on the grass, the mowed grass, you can get ticks because the deer are out there. The deer are spreading ticks out there. Reducing the number of deer should reduce the number of ticks. They breed 500 ticks on them. Whereas, the mice that ticks depend on, they'll have 5 or 6 or 10, ticks on them. Deer are implicated in, spreading the range of ticks and keeping the numbers of ticks up. Yeah, deer are normally thought of as browsers. They should be, due to different forces, a couple different things happen. In a normal, healthy ecosystem, deer are being chased by predators. They're having to watch out for predators. They also, whatever plants they feed on, often those plants start to build up defensive chemicals. So they have to keep moving on. With our deer, obviously we have no predators moving them around. We don't, wolves, pumas, they were driven out of the east, a century ago. So the deer have nothing moving them around. They're not afraid of people. They've really gotten used to people. So now the deer can just stand in one place and they can eat a plant that they like to nothing. Then they can move on, they can stand in that place. They don't have to look around for predators anymore. They barely have to run from people. So they keep eating pretty much everything. But of course they've eaten everything in the forest, and there's not much food left in the forest. And instead of being browsers, they're becoming grazers. So they go off into the lawns, and just like cows, they eat along the grass. And other scientists have told me they don't eat grass, but maybe they're eating clover, whatever else is in the grass. Who knows? But they're eating, they go out there and they graze like cows. And they can just sit there and, nothing's chasing them out there either. They're out in the open. They should be afraid of predators, but there's nothing to make them afraid, so they can just graze out there in the open, walking along the grass. Many students at night will see them. They sleep in our woods, and then all night long they're grazing on grass and who knows what else. A class did a study on deer droppings. So a lot of people always ask me, why, how do we know how many deer there are? And I can count them. I can count half of them. I can count half the deer of the campus. The deer up in the hills are a little bit harder to count, but they don't run away. And so I can just walk through them and count the deer. If I were to use, regular wildlife population statistics or equations, I would get far, far more deer. Because normally in a wild situation, if you count a certain number of animals, you're going to get maybe 10% of what's actually there, depending on what kind of animal you're studying. And especially if it's a forest where you can't find everything. Out here, I was verified that I was counting exactly half the deer on campus because I was counting, about 60 deer. And then our infrared flyover counted 120 deer within our borders. Of course, then another 100 or so outside the borders too. But yeah, so there's a lot of deer out there because of historical factors of losing predators and changing habitat, lack of fear. Deer have become very overpopulated in our woods, on our property. And that overpopulation is severely diminishing the forest, if not killing it outright. It's hard to tell, because forests take a long time to die. Trees can take a long time to die. Years ago when I started, I was kind of hoping for trees to fall, because then I could bring my volunteers and they could practice, removing a tree off a trail, have fun doing that. But now, every time I see a tree fall, I get sad because nothing's going to replace it. So our whole forest is not regenerating. There are no seedlings out there. There's no young trees coming up. And we actually used to do wildflower hikes on campus, but now we don't because you can't really find any wildflowers. There's 3 main species that we can find in the woods, and even those are severely diminished. Within our deer fences that we have, our deer exclusion fences, you can see a lot more of even the common flowers inside of it than outside of it. If the deer population does not get into balance with the carrying capacity of the forest, then eventually we're just not going to have a forest anymore. Humans caused the problem, changing habitat, getting rid of predators, and unfortunately humans are going to have to be the part of the solution. Whether people like it or not. If we want to have a healthy forest, we have to do something about the deer population.